Most people think you need a whole Bitcoin to get rich. But today, I want to talk about why that is. I believe that just 10% of a whole Bitcoin could be enough not only to change your life, but to let you retire in the next 5 years. The 3 simulations we're going to look at today make it clear that just 0.1 Bitcoin can change your life, even if you live in the richest and most expensive cities in the world. Most people understand that there will only ever be a maximum of 21 million Bitcoin, but what many people don't realize is that 19.8 million of those Bitcoin are already in circulation. That means that today, 94% of all Bitcoin that will ever exist have already been distributed and are already in circulation. Only about 6% of the total Bitcoin supply will even be released over the next 115 years. And by the year 2034, 99% of all Bitcoin will have been released. This is what Michael Saylor refers to as the Bitcoin gold rush. This crazy statistic is also shown and illustrated very nicely by this chart here. Here you can see that every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin distributed is halved until it becomes less and less. Currently, an average of 3.125 Bitcoin are distributed every 10 minutes. So, over the next 4 years, about 400,000 Bitcoin will be mined and brought into circulation. That means we have around 450 Bitcoin created daily, which results in an average block reward of 3.125 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And things are about to get even crazier. But before we go on, you'd be doing me a huge favor if you could take a second and smash the like button for peace, freedom, and decentralization. Higher Bitcoin prices, and by doing so, you're also helping this channel spread the message even further, so that more people can learn about Bitcoin. So thank you for this amazing support. I'm also going to show you my shells today. But things get really interesting when we take a look at this chart. Here we can see all the Bitcoin block rewards, and if we jump ahead to the year 2036, right here, you'll see that things look completely different. By then, the block reward will only be 0.19 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And that's only a fifth of a current Bitcoin block. And it gets even crazier when you look at the entire time frame from 2036 to 2040. During that period, only 39,000 Bitcoin will be mined. And now, imagine the headline that was just published recently. Jack Mallers and Howard Lutnick announced we're copying MicroStrategy here, and now they hold 42,000 Bitcoin as part of a Bitcoin treasury operation. That's more than the total block reward for 4 years if we just look a few years ahead. It really makes you realize how early we are with Bitcoin and how incredibly valuable Bitcoin will become in the future. A single publicly traded company with 42,000 Bitcoin already has more Bitcoin right now than will be mined in total between 2036 and 2040. And the really crazy thing is this. By 2036, 99% of all Bitcoin will have already been mined. And sure, you could say, okay, 2036 is still 11 years away, so why the rush and why push so hard right now? And you could just take it easy and deal with everything later. Why do I keep talking about needing 0.1 Bitcoin or even 0.001 Bitcoin? And how even that can already have an impact here, definitely on your life. And the reason I'm pushing so hard here is, on the one hand, the Bitcoin price could take off, the Bitcoin price could keep rising, and the window to accumulate Bitcoin cheaply will close. On the other hand, it might not be so easy anymore to just go on some exchange like 21 Bitcoin, Coinbase, and the like to accumulate large amounts of Bitcoin here, because this chart you see here really worries me. Here you can see the Bitcoin that are being held on exchanges. And you can see that just in the last 2 years, around 900,000 Bitcoin have left the exchanges. And what you see here is deeply concerning for several reasons. If you look at this black, dark line here or dark blue here, what this line here shows is the Bitcoin price, which keeps rising higher and higher all the time. On the other hand, the orange line, here we see the coins and they're getting fewer and fewer and fewer. And this trend also seems to be continuing here. That means we have a rising Bitcoin price while there are fewer and fewer Bitcoin on the exchanges. And now comes the interesting part. We've never had a bull market where the spread between the rising Bitcoin price and the outflow of Bitcoin has been this strong. On the exchanges, this is where they meet. And that is simply an absolute wildfire that could be ignited here. For the first time, we're seeing a multi-year price increase in Bitcoin while the number of coins on exchanges keeps dropping steadily. And exactly what we can see here is making a lot of people think, what's happening here? What's different this time? And let's take a look at that in a moment. But first, I want to emphasize this point again. If we continue the trend we've seen here since 2020, then for the first time in Bitcoin's history, coins have been leaving the exchanges permanently for 5 years in a row. If this trend continues for another 5 years, so every 2 years as before, 900,000 Bitcoins disappear from here, then by 2029, there would be no more Bitcoin left on the exchanges. Do you know what that means? And yes, it probably won't happen. But exactly because we're potentially moving more and more in this direction toward a supply shock, I'm telling you again, get involved with Bitcoin now. Because it's especially the supply side that's really changing dramatically here. If you own 0.1 Bitcoin right now, then you own something that cannot just be created again, like fiat money, which can simply be printed out of thin air. And if we assume that we have 21 million Bitcoin, which actually isn't the real number, since there are also lost Bitcoins, but we're calculating here in a very, very conservative way. And if we were to redistribute these 21 million Bitcoin among the 8 billion people, or divide them up evenly, then only 210 million people out of those 8 billion could even own 0.1 Bitcoin. And for comparison, today there are about 50 to 60 million millionaires. So if you belong to this 210 million group here, you're already part of the global upper class. And that's with just 0.1 Bitcoin. But that's only half the truth, because Bitcoin isn't distributed evenly. A lot of Bitcoin is already held by so-called whales. And as already mentioned, it's not just the supply side that's changing here. What's really wild is that the demand side is also changing dramatically. And this should really become clear to you when you study the HODL waves, meaning which Bitcoin holders are holding long-term and which ones are holding short-term. The majority of the Bitcoin network is now already in the hands of so-called long-term holders who haven't moved their Bitcoin for 6 months, 2 years, or even longer. This also makes it very clear that a large portion of the Bitcoin supply is illiquid, meaning it may never be moved again, or only in very rare and unlikely cases. And these holders, who belong to the long-term holders, the so-called diamond hands as they're often called, that's who we're talking about here. These are governments, ETFs, companies, billionaires who already hold massive amounts of Bitcoin. And just to make this clear for you, since the introduction of Bitcoin ETFs here, which was, roughly about 18 months ago, or something like that, I'm not sure if that number is 100% accurate. But these Bitcoin ETFs have already absorbed 1.4 million Bitcoin, more than 6% of the total supply, and all of this happened in just a few months, 16 or 17 months. So what happens when these ETFs, these governments, these institutional players, these treasury companies, and so on, here in the next few months and in the next, let's just assume again the 16 or 17 months, in the next period, they buy another 1.3 million Bitcoin. Michael Saylor says that even 2 or 3 million Bitcoin is basically not the limit for him. He still wants to keep accumulating Bitcoin. There is no upper limit. The US has said it too. Hines has also said it. There is no upper limit. They're trying to accumulate as much Bitcoin as they can get their hands on. What do you think? How will other nations react if Donald Trump speaks into the microphone and says, yeah, we have now bought 200,000 Bitcoin and we are going to buy even more Bitcoin in the future? If major nations publicly reveal their Bitcoin holdings, show them, what will that trigger in the market? And when you combine all of this, you start to understand more and more why I say 0.1. Bitcoin can definitely already change your life right now. And what's exciting is, if we look at the publicly traded companies now, like the treasury companies, Metaplanet, Strategy, and Company, we can already see that together they hold around 1 million Bitcoin, right? That's about 5% of the entire Bitcoin supply. That means in the last 2 years, there have been massive purchases here. And together with the Bitcoin ETFs, about 12.5% of all Bitcoin would be bought up just by these publicly traded companies, treasury companies. And here with the Bitcoin ETFs, we now even have institutional players, banks involved, and so on, not even including those who are also buying Bitcoin here on the side. And now you have to ask yourself, these 12.5% Bitcoin treasury companies and Bitcoin ETFs, what they've absorbed here in 2 years, will they just stop in the future and simply say, we're not buying any more Bitcoin? Or will they maybe try to accumulate a similar amount of Bitcoin again over the next 2 years? Or will it maybe get even more intense? Because we're still seeing more and more Bitcoin treasury companies storming into the market. And yes, Bitcoin can crash, Bitcoin can also fall. Some people say Bitcoin will drop to $0 or something like that. I see the probability of that as very low. I also see the probability as low that Bitcoin will trade for a longer period below 100,000 US dollars. Very, very unlikely if we just look at this massive demand and, on the other hand, the steadily shrinking supply. And now the question is, how much Bitcoin do you really need here to retire, even if you live in the most expensive cities in the world? You can see it here as well. The most expensive cities: Singapore, Hong Kong, London, Shanghai, Monaco, Zurich, New York, Paris, Sao Paulo, and then Sydney. And now let's calculate how much money you would need there in 10, 20, or 30 years to be able to retire there. The global money supply has grown by an average of 7% per year over the last 50 years. And that also includes living expenses like rent, education, insurance, and groceries. So now we can simply assume 7% inflation per year, so annual inflation, and use that to calculate 20 years into the future. Today, in the most expensive cities, you need about $2 million US dollars to be able to retire. And in 20 years, with 7% inflation, that would be around 900,000 US dollars that you would need here to retire. And now the question comes up, okay, how can Bitcoin help me here? How can 0.1 Bitcoin help to cover a retirement need of 900,000 US dollars here? And now we can make a few assumptions here, for example, that inflation will continue to grow at 7% per year. It will probably be even more, since we're now entering the fourth turning, the end of a debt cycle. But let's stay realistic here. Let's be very, very conservative, 7% per year. Then we can assume here that Bitcoin has always had a compound annual growth rate of 100% in the past. That is, it doubled on average every year. But let's be a bit more conservative here as well, so I'll calculate with 40% per year for the next 20 years. That would put us at 94 million US dollars in 20 years. Yeah, it sounds really, really crazy, but then with 0.1 Bitcoin, we're talking about 9.4 million here, US dollars, so that's 10 times what you need for retirement. So with just 0.1 Bitcoin, you could retire comfortably even in the most expensive cities in the world, provided that, of course, assuming you buy now and assuming you don't sell your Bitcoin, you just hodl your Bitcoin for now. 20, 30 years, the longer you have to hodl, the more wealth you can build up. And the easier it will be for you to retire, of course. And sure, I know now the comments will come in again like, yeah, but I'm already old and all that. Of course, that's not possible now. If you're already 80 or 90, you can't just say, okay, I'll wait another 30 years until my 0.1. Bitcoin is somehow, I don't know, 50 million, 60 million. No, until one Bitcoin is worth 50 or 60 million or something like that, then I can retire. Of course, that's obvious. At that point, Bitcoin can't really help you fully secure your entire retirement anymore, but at least it can help you secure a large part of it. You could, of course, look at the whole scenario even more pessimistically. You could assume a higher or a lower savings rate. Here, we've basically just assumed you have a fixed amount of Bitcoin and that amount never increases. There are also people who already have 0.1 Bitcoin and then save another $200 every month, or something like that on top. In that case, of course, the point at which you can retire comes even sooner. Additionally, you have to say that it's not really desirable to just let your Bitcoin sit there on the side, just having it. And then just chill, do nothing anymore, just say, okay, fuck off, I'm retiring early now. In my opinion, you should always do something that comes from the heart, so you don't fall into the trap of having to retire. I sometimes look at older people who are really full of joy for life. They don't really have something like retirement. They still work, they still do what they love, but they don't see it as work. That means that's actually the ultimate trick to retire immediately. Just do something that matters to you, that you enjoy, something you can really get lost in. You can keep doing that until you're 100. You could even keep making money until you're 100, for all I care. Theoretically, you wouldn't even have to retire at all. Or in other words, you could already be retired now because it doesn't feel like work. Because you only need to retire if you're actually working. And by work, I mean work that isn't really fun. And then you have this concept called retirement. So actually, the whole concept is kind of bullshit. But for a lot of people, it's just always about knowing. It's really, really important. When do you reach that fuck you, fuck off moment where you can just say, okay, now I can focus 100% on what I actually want to do and don't have to slave away anymore, just working hourly jobs just to pay some bills? And that's exactly it here. The reason why 0.1 Bitcoin, even though many people see it differently, can truly be life-changing here. Let me know in the comments below how you see the whole thing. Do you agree with this or not? And if not, feel free to leave your criticism down below as well. And if you still want to buy Bitcoin, I'll put a link for you down below. 21 Bitcoin, how you can buy Bitcoin easily, safely, and simply. Use the code BitcoinHotel here to save up to 20% on fees when buying Bitcoin. See you next time. Peace out.